Hey, welcome to the Create Unknown, the home of Make Something Mean Something. We're live on Discord with a bunch of our patrons. Lovely to see all of your familiar avatared faces. I am Kevin Lieber, and with me, as always, is Matthew Tabor.
Yeah, I'm firing on all three of the important cylinders today. I brewed coffee, I brewed tea, and I cracked some Diet Birch beer. That's how ready I am today for you in this podcast.
Yeah, well, I mean, you marathoned the recording that we did last week. After we stopped recording, I took off and started working on God knows what. And you hung out with a bunch of our patrons for, 4 hours? You said 4.5 hours talking about...
Yeah, after you and I were done. Yeah, it added up to almost 6 hours from when, the time at which we hit record to when I had to go eat something. At a certain point, you do have to disengage and eat something. And that happened at we started at 2 and that happened around 7:45. So that was a good session, but it happened that way because we got talking about some problems with Zoomers and what exactly the problems are, if they can be fixed, what the implications are, and all these people in the chat started discussing it and theorizing about it from different angles, which was really pretty fascinating, and it just didn't stop. We could have kept going even more, so that's why it made sense for us to co-opt the episode chat discussion of last week, and then have us do it, because the whole time when we were talking, when all of us were talking about this, I kept saying I wonder what Kevin's take is on this. Well, so hopefully we can throw a bunch of those pieces at you.
What is after? So you say Zoomers, but it's really not Zoomers. It is everyone pretty much who, well, starting with Zoomers and now every generation beyond them, Gen Alpha. I don't know what comes after Alpha.
Okay.
Gen Beta.
So
is there going to be a generation Beta?
They're all betas. Let's nail down what's what in terms of the generation. I want to do that really quickly. I'm Googling furiously here because I want to be clear about who this is and who it's not, because it's definitely the Generation Z people, which would be the ones who are 25 and under, I think is about where it is. But it creeps into, the millennials then. It's at the lower end of us.
Okay.
If I had to draw a completely arbitrary line here, I would say under 30. And that's a crossover between Gen Z and the bottom end of millennials.
Okay. All right. So from what I understand, the general question is so if you grew up in a world with the internet and the majority of your social interactions happen through things like texting, DMs, basically in-person communication, not even talking on the phone really, because that's sort of a thing that's a boomer thing to do now. Even talking on the phone is weird to people.
I make phone calls generally to customer support. I bet 80% of the phone calls I make are me following up a problem with a delivery or an order.
Right.
So yeah, it's hardly anything anymore.
So the question is, has that reshaped how people interact? Has it reshaped how people talk to each other? Is it a problem? Is it a problem that when someone does have to talk in person, it goes badly, it's stilted, it's awkward? What is it? But if everybody is awkward, is there awkwardness if everyone's at the same level of awkwardness? I don't know. How did this conversation start sort of in the Discord with the patrons? Where did you begin?
Right. Well, I want to give context to why I've even been thinking about this.
Okay.
Because there's the long-term stuff. You and I have been thinking about it for a long time. We've touched on it even on some of the podcast episodes with differences in communication. But there's that long-term thought, and then there's what really set the hook for me. I was at an event a week or two ago, and there were a fair number of youngish people. And again, arbitrary line, young to me is below your 30s. That's where I look at somebody and I'm like, oh, this person is younger than me. Because we're talking a minimum of 10 years, right? 10, 12 years at best. And if you're, 21 years old, I could be your dad. So, that's a different level. And I was thinking about how all these people interacted, not just the young ones, but some of the older ones, including one guy who is literally in the top 3 of communicators I've ever met in my life. He's almost magically good, and not unsettlingly so either.
What does that mean? Charming, personable. What does that mean?
He knows for example, he knows exactly what to talk about with whomever he's talking to. And it's perfect. So for example, I spent 2 minutes talking to him, and he talked to me about sump pumps, which are pumps that get water out of basements that flood. And Roberto Clemente, the Pirates baseball player who died in 1973. So he talked to me about sump pumps and old baseball. That is a very good fit for me.
Right.
There was nobody else in that room who would have had that combination. Now, I don't know him. We know face and name, and that's it. So it's not like we have a friendship or anything. And in a split second from the one line that I said to him, he was able to just steer the conversation in an appropriate direction for the person he was having that conversation with. Talk about like superpower level freakish ability. But obviously you're happy in that conversation because you're in a comfortable place and it's probably something you know about. It's incredible. So that's the high end of this. That's the ultimate pinnacle of this. And that truly is like that, even beyond generational talent, like legendary talent of a Michael Jordan sort of thing, like Babe Ruth, legend status. Anyway, and I was seeing people, having varying degrees of these abilities. And so I started thinking back to just all the different events and stuff that I'd done over maybe 5 years. I had an extremely busy year before COVID, whatever year that was.
2019.
2019 it was? Okay. Yeah. So I was in 11 countries that year. That's when we went to Tokyo, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of context in a lot of different places. And, sometimes I know the people well, sometimes I don't. So I'm seeing this happen, and I'm thinking, this person looks really out of their element and uncomfortable, for example. But they don't have any personality problem here. They're not a narcissist. They're not an ego-driven person who's upset that they can't, talk about what they want to. No. So these are totally average people, but they're really uncomfortable in conversation here, and it shows. They aren't having a conversation with the other person so much as they're just kind of broadcasting at them and then waiting for a reaction and then getting ready to broadcast when they get that reaction. And sometimes this happens on both sides, where both people have this kind of strategy with it, even though they're not thinking about it. It's just the way it happens. And you get two people really broadcasting at each other. And this is not good communication. Boss Threads had a really good example from theater, with young actors and actresses. He said sometimes they'll see people who it's clear that they're just waiting for their opportunity to talk. Well, I've always known people like that, but they're the boorish people. They're the narcissists. Well, now normal people are doing this a little bit. And so I started to think, well, why is this happening? And I thought how strange it must feel to be forced into real-time communication when your entire life is what I think of as deliberate communication. You get a text, you have however long you want to respond to that text, exactly how you want to. You can word it exactly how you want to because you have the time to do that. You can do it right now when you get the text. You can do it 2 hours from now. Or you can not respond at all. Anything online, you have total control over what you say and when you say it. You almost never anymore have a real-time interaction where you have to think and respond on your feet. So when I was looking at all of these examples of people struggling, I thought, well, this is not an indictment of who they are. Like they're not dumb. They're not bad at dealing with people. It's not that. They just have virtually no practice with this. And it extends to a lot of other areas too. And this is where I hand it off to you. If we get data on millennials and Zoomers almost never having gone on a date, like 2/3 of them at the age of 18 never having gone on a date, well, why would they be any good at sitting down and talking to somebody who they might have a romantic interest in? That's something that, 30 years ago, we did it, and we did it very badly, and we embarrassed ourselves, and we were nervous and anxiety filled because we were terrible at it. And then hopefully most people got better over time. And then by the time you were a full-on adult, you were a capable communicator with somebody you wanted to date. But you've mentioned so many times that there are all these things that just people don't do anymore. So my big question and what kicked off this discussion in the episode chat is, are there any implications to this? Like broad societal implications of people not being able to communicate with each other? And then number two, is there any hope? Is there any way to fix this? If you were 21, your entire life has been that deliberate conversation, what can you do?
Man, what a question. Well, while you were discussing sort of the ways in which people no longer have to do this, I was thinking of how broadly that extends to not just friendships or texting each other, but also service industry things. Because I started to think, well, there are a lot of things in the service industry in which you have to, usually you don't have to have a conversation, but you do have to have a back and forth with, a retail worker or someone who works at the thing that you're trying to do. You don't even have to really do that anymore. I mean, do you have to go to the bank if you could just do everything through your banking app? Do you have to go to the pizzeria and order a slice of pizza in person if you could just do DoorDash or Grubhub or any other number of things, Uber Eats, through your phone? There are so many things. Just order clothes off of the internet, order whatever you need from Amazon. Even you don't even have to, if you do go to a store, you could just use self-checkout and not even have to make eye contact with a checkout person.
Yeah.
Like the list of things that no longer involve any level of human interaction is pretty long and growing, and it's not getting shorter. It's just going to continue to get longer. Even something like buying a car. I mean, buying a car traditionally was this strangely kind of combative haggling process back in the day, right? Where you had to have like some level of flair and know-how in order to not get swindled by someone, trying to get you to overpay for some warranty that you don't need or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, the negotiating savvy that shows up in like old movies and TV shows, where a guy is really proud of his ability to do this. And also the scummy used car dealers. That's not so much of a thing anymore. Do you know how sad writers must have been when like Carfax became a thing? When Carfax comes out, they're like, oh no, we can't use the trope of this shitty used car dealer anymore. This is an entire like character vertical that's gone out the window in all of our shows.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to talk at some point with like an experienced TV writer, just because someone I'm sure we could get on the podcast would have a very long list of those types of characters, tropes. We mentioned it. I mean, I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago that just how cell phones ruin a lot of conflict in storytelling.
Oh,
but
yeah. That was excellent. Yeah.
But all of these things, it's so funny because there's this paradox of it making life a lot easier, a lot more convenient. It, frees up a lot of time. You have this found time that you can then spend in other ways. But the negative aspect of it is what you're talking about, in which, man, you get very little actual human face time with people. And it takes a long time. It takes, like you said, with the dating thing, like growing up in an era where people weren't texting each other and there was, virtually no emailing or anything like that. Going on a date was horrible and nerve-wracking and extremely embarrassing and anxiety, riddling. That's the stuff also of old movies, of just the comedy of like trying to date someone. And man, doing that now, well, do you have to? I guess that's when I start to approach trying to poke at an answer to your questions, is like, if everyone is at the same level with all of this stuff and everything can be deliberate and can be ordered through an app, like at what point is it really a problem? Like, when does it come to a head where all of a sudden you do have to have social skills that you never had to use before, or you never had to develop before, and now you are struggling because you don't know how to carry on a conversation? That's the question I don't know the answer to. I don't think anybody does, because all of this is so new.
This is really new. And this is a change too that's happened very, very quickly. This is basically a 15-year issue. And that's being really generous about it. 10 years is probably more accurate.
Probably, yeah. 12.
Almost nothing culturally or socially anywhere in the world changes that fast, and never has. These are the sorts of things that take a century to develop, where this thing is substantially different than how it used to be. It's very gradual. 10 years is half a generation. There's really nothing like this that's ever happened. So it's hard to understand the pace of it, and also what the implications are going to be. Because when something goes really slowly, you're also seeing the implications of it very slowly. As an example that I think everybody would know, that general counterculture rebellion of the late 60s, that's kind of, everything under that umbrella that you think of now. Well, that happened pretty slowly, and then continued through the 70s and into the 80s. And each step along the way, you were seeing what was changing and also seeing what it affected. So you had this, 25-year kind of crossover generation period where it was a gentle, slow thing, even when it appeared to be fast. But you had a lot of time to see the reactions. That was also a generally political thing. And you can see the difference in choices that people made there. What we're talking about is personal. It's not society-wide in the sense that, like, it's related to a policy. This is how every individual conducts themselves. And we're lumping people together to talk about it generally, but it is the most individual issue. There's no tracking that. There's no getting a really good sense by the year of how that plays out, other than, data on things like dates or whatever. So we're guessing about the implications of this. But my immediate reaction here is, if it's difficult to talk to a broad range of people, then you will gravitate toward talking to a very narrow range of people that fit within the kind of bounds of what you're already comfortable with. I think of it a little bit like cooking. I tweeted a thing the other day about how the food budget for delivery services is apparently 30% higher now in the US than what people spend on groceries. They call it eating out too. So it's not just, Grubhub. It's also going to a restaurant. But for every $100 people spend on groceries, they're spending $130 on eating out or delivery services. Well, that means they're not cooking very much. they're cooking a lot less in the past. If they're not cooking very much, they probably have a narrower focus of what food they can make. So when they go to cook, they have fewer options. They might know how to make decent pasta dishes. So like when they go to cook, okay, it's going to be Italian most of the time. They don't have a very broad range. And so that's a sort of narrowing that I think is going to happen with people, where if you are totally unprepared to deal with just general people in the world, you will default to that narrow bit that you do know. I don't know what you've been sipping, but you've got it all wrong. It's time to commit to the leaf. We've embraced the smoothness and surprising pick-me-up that tea provides. I literally drink it all day long, nearly a gallon a day, and it powers me through research, script writing, and forums on websites that I refuse to name here. But we don't drink normie NPC tea. We drink cultured and refined anime tea from the Dragon's Treasure. Kevin still likes the gunpowder green called Space Cowboy, and I've sampled nearly 40 Dragon's Treasure teas at this point. Lately I've been slamming black teas like Kentucky Bourbon and Liquefied Berserk Despair. Scottish Breakfast is deep and peaty, and I smooth it over with Sebastian's Morning Earl Grey, which has the best vanilla cream taste I think I've ever had in a cup. Give me a pot of that with a hot meatball sub from Sal's Pizza and Brooks Barbecue Chicken to wash down my last meal on death row. I highly recommend the sampler packs. You'll want to try everything just like I did. I literally have not had one tea that I wouldn't be happy to reorder. The Dragon's Wings membership fuels new tea experimentation, and the Tea of the Month Club provides a regularly scheduled surprise. And when you order from the Dragon's Treasure using code CREATE, you'll get 10% off your order. That's 10% off using the code CREATE at thedragonstreasure.com. The link's in the description.
Right, which, again, I don't know. Let me give an example of like bad interviewers. So I'm trying to give an example of like why this would be undesirable to be the type of person who just talks at someone and, or is just waiting for their turn to talk. It's like really, really obvious when it comes to interviewers. Like that's the worst way to interview someone, is to just have like a set of questions and not actually listen to the answers. And then you're just waiting for them to stop answering your one question so you can ask the next one. That is like a cardinal sin when it comes to interviewing. It is the exact opposite of how you're supposed to interview. And this is not me making this up. This is very, very old. When I was in school, when I was in college, I took an audio class in which one of the segments in that class was an interviewing segment. And we got graded on our capacity to like do an entertaining and informative interview of someone else. This was part of the class. And that's pretty much like 101 is that, yes, you have your bullet pointed list of things that you want to ask, conversation starters, topic starters, that sort of thing. But the number one quality that you need to have as an interviewer is your capacity to listen to the person that you're interviewing. You can't just be a robot. You can't just be a drone who's looking to check off the questions that you wrote down, because that's not how a conversation works. You will not get anywhere with that. You won't mind. I mean, how many times doing this podcast for however many years it's been going on, do we not get to the good stuff until about an hour in to the conversation?
Right. And we often don't know what the good stuff is going to be.
That's the point.
Yeah. Like how many times do we think we know what the good stuff will be? And then it turns out the actual thing is radically different. And you only know that from an hour of actual conversation, which is mostly listening to what somebody says and then responding to what they're saying and thinking, as opposed to reforming it into your own stuff. And you hear people do this in interviews. I'm glad that you brought up the interviewing stuff because it's such a clear example of it. When somebody says, so what you're saying is, or so you're saying, and that's the person reframing what a person has said into what they want to talk about.
Right.
Because it's almost always wrong. It's almost always such a severe reduction of, whatever. And that woman who conducted an interview with Jordan Peterson turned into a meme for some time where it's like, just the most ridiculous thing so you're saying is completely inappropriate collusion. But what that is in terms of communication is a person taking what that person has said and then putting it through their own little meat grinder to spit out something that's much more about them than the person they're talking to. And that's bad communication. It's horrible when it happens when you're talking to somebody at a party. You leave that conversation thinking that you've just talked to an ego monster. The person makes it all about them. And when it happens in an interview, it's a bad interview. It's not a good conversation. It yields nothing of value other than entertaining sound bites from people doing this so badly.
Oh, it's a railroading of the conversation is what it is, because almost never is what they're saying what you're saying is, because by default, they already said what they're saying. And now you are warping it through your own bias into what you want them to have said. Right. And that is just, like totally throwing a carpet bomb into the conversation.
That's the sort of thing that happens when you've gone much of your life conducting a conversation on your own terms, where you are essentially broadcasting. If you're receiving something, you're putting it in your own terms before you spit the next thing back out. That's not how talking to anybody works. It just doesn't. And nobody likes being in those conversations either. So when you're in a social setting,
because now you're putting them on the defensive. It's almost like an attack, really, because now they have to reframe and defend what they just said. And no one wants to do that.
It is not at all comfortable.
It's combative.
You're right. And you, the point, which, I mentioned this guy who talked to me about sump pumps and baseball. The point in a conversation, well, not the point, but the thing that really kicks it off is that the person you're talking to feels comfortable. Now, think about how many times this applies. If it's an interview, then you want them to feel comfortable so that they say whatever your interview's about, whether it's talking about something personal they otherwise wouldn't get to. And we've had some of those. We've had some really good examples where people only told stories because they felt comfortable talking to us. Food for Dogs is a good example of this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud of how we had a conversation that made her feel like she wasn't too vulnerable to tell that story. In a completely different vein, I think that we made Sanachu feel quite comfortable. That was a really good open conversation, in part because we let it be. So you do get some really good stuff when you're comfortable. Well,
and the worst podcasts we've done are ones in which we weren't able to do that. There are guests that we've had where we were not able to get them to remove the facade, and they remained guarded, stilted, and never opened up. And those are the most boring episodes.
There are times where you just can't crack the nut.
Yeah.
And that's either because it just doesn't happen, or sometimes somebody is so shockingly guarded that they play defense to to a degree you didn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
But think about all the times when you want a conversation to be comfortable. You go on a date. I'm sure it would be better if the person you're on the date with feels comfortable talking. You talk to a professional. Don't you want a doctor? You go to the doctor for a visit, not necessarily a urinary tract emergency that sends you to the ER, but a normal annual checkup. You go in, the doctor's like, well, how have you been? Tell me about, what's wrong, whatever. Don't you want the doctor to feel comfortable talking to you about all these issues? It's everybody. Like, you want your friends to feel comfortable talking to you. So this is a major facet of communication of all kinds, friends, podcasts, doctors, whatever the hell. Yet it seems so many people don't have the skills to put the other person at ease, right? They sincerely don't know. Back to the beginning, I think it's because they don't have any practice with it through no fault of their own. But then what are the implications? you know.
I don't know what the implications are if everyone is at the same level, though. Like if we're at different levels, right? If you're at this conference and you're the old guy with all of these kids, and you notice it, you think to yourself, wow, like the world has changed. Things have changed, and all of this is really awkward in ways that it shouldn't have to be, but it just is because of how the world has changed and how people have grown up communicating with one another. Well, as you age out of those events, and now everyone is just at that same mode of communication, I don't know. Does it become noticeable? Is that just the new norm? And as far as asking if there's any intervention, I resoundingly think the answer to that is no, because any intervention to change this would be compulsory. It would have to be, well, we're going to make you go to summer camp that has no cell phones. Okay. And now every year, all of you kids, you have to go to no cell phone summer camp, and you have to learn how to just talk to each other and hang out and be bored and have awkward silence and all of that stuff that compels you to talk to people that you wouldn't talk to otherwise, because maybe you think that you don't like them and they don't like you, and you'll never find out any differently. Well, no one's doing that. No one's going to compulsory no cell phone summer camp. That's not a thing.
No. And, even before all of the tech aspect to this was happening anyway in certain parts of the world. Okay. And the really kind of famous write-up about it is Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, where it was mostly a sociology book where this would have been the late 90s, I think, noticed that cultural institutions in the United States, patterns were changing, and people weren't doing community interactive activities to the degree that they were in the past. And the title of the book comes from him making an example of bowling leagues, which was a like ubiquitous thing in all of the U.S. for several generations. And it kind of most men were in a bowling league, even if they sucked at bowling. It wasn't about that at all. Even participation in things like that were reducing in the 90s. And then the tech stuff that we're talking about really accelerated a problem that had already begun to happen. So this actually comes on top of a slow siloing culturally that was already happening. I think I may change my mind about this over time. But right now, I think this is the most serious threat that we have. And that sounds overblown. I admit that. But I want to explain why I think that. You learn how things work with people and in life and in work. It's just all that stuff from dealing with other people. You just do. From interacting with things that are different than what you do, new things, just interacting with new aspects of the world. This is why something like a bowling league is good socially, because each week you're playing a different team. So over months, you're spending a few hours with a new team, a new group of guys. And, maybe you're a physician's assistant and your team is all people who work at the hospital. Well, the next team who comes up next week, might run a garage, doing car repair. And these aren't people who you may normally spend 3 hours with at a time. But, you talk, you hang out a little bit with your team, a little bit with them. And, you get friendly and you understand how they talk to you and how you should talk to them. This is just how it goes. Okay. And when you take that away, then the ultimate consequence is that you don't understand other people. You don't understand people who are not like you. And when that happens, that begins to manifest in severe, severe ways. I think it's a reason why politically everything is very polarized, where, let me tell the younger set that this is how it used to exist, like in the 90s. In the 90s, if you were leaning toward one party, you thought the other one was wrong. Now that's not the case. Now you think the other one is evil. Again, I'm overstating this, but that didn't exist generations ago. Not in the mainstream. Not in the mainstream. There weren't signs on people's lawns taking a shit on the opposition, one way or the other, where, all around me, there are signs on both sides doing that. But anyway, there's a lack of understanding with people, and that's how conflicts happen. When you don't understand what's going on with people, a relationship romantically is not going to work out. You're going to have some crazy fights before you break it off. Well, when two countries don't understand each other, they tend to get in crazy fights too. So this happens from the individual all the way up to like the global level. And when the general pattern is that we understand less of how other people think and how they live, we are much, much more prone to conflict and unhappiness.
We want to help you make something and mean something. And we say that phrase all the time because when you're making something and you know it means something, even if it's just to you, that's when you feel pretty good about what you're creating. The support for the Create Unknown in recent weeks has been incredible. Animators, artists, musicians, YouTubers, aspiring filmmakers, comedians, it is crazy how talented everybody in this community is. Consider joining the Create Unknown Patreon. Every dollar that comes through goes straight into the podcast and its community. That means more highlights videos. It means a big Minecraft project that's on the way. And eventually we'd like to manufacture custom piss bottles so you never have to leave your battle station. And being a patron unlocks participation in all of our live recordings. You've seen the roster of guests we've had. Having access to their minds is a unique opportunity. You can go to patreon.com/thecreateunknown or click the link that's in the description. Every little bit helps, and your support means absolutely everything to us. Patreon.com/thecreateunknown, links in the description. We appreciate you, Space Cowboys.
One thing I was thinking about actually has to do with a conversation that we had before we started recording last week. So I think for the most part, it's not controversial to say that movies suck now. I think everyone kind of agrees that movies suck now, and stories overall seem to suck now. I cannot remember the last time there was like a big breakthrough story that everybody was really in love with. I mean, am I missing something? But like in the realm of book sales, what was the last book series or book in general that people went, bananas over culturally? Was it Twilight? Was it 50 Shades of Grey? Like, it was a long time ago, whatever it was.
Right. You had a couple strings that were a really big deal. Starting with Harry Potter, which
which is old.
At this point, it's 20 plus years old.
It's old now. Yeah, it's old.
Yeah, I remember. I remember meeting a girl in college who had this crazy scarf on. I'm like, oh, that's cool. What what is that? Because it was sort of like English sports team scarves, but it wasn't. And she explained that it was a Gryffindor scarf that had the Gryffindor quest, and I'm like, I was out of the loop and didn't know any of this was.
Yeah.
But no, you're right. These things that really hit with the characters that mattered. I think Hunger Games might be the most recent.
Okay, right. Hunger Games. That's a good one. That was also a while ago. That was also over a decade ago. Regardless of whether you think everything sucks, you will agree that everything is a remake at this point. Everything is a reboot. Everything is a sequel. We're just telling the same stories over and over and over again with the same characters and the same universes, okay? Or adapting old books. So my point is that I'm not saying this is the univariate cause, but it could be a symptom of what we're talking about, in which if people haven't had novel experiences in their life, I don't mean novel like the book, I mean like unique. If they haven't had bizarre, unique, out of the ordinary, story-worthy experiences, well, what you're left with is just retelling stories that you've seen before in old movies and old TV shows. So you're just kind of regurgitating, like Frankensteining bits of other stories that probably everybody else has seen over and over again. And you're not bringing anything new to the plate, right?
Yes.
And I thought about this with your ice cream. So you mentioned,
Oh,
you mentioned,
yeah.
You mentioned bowling leagues. And
Yeah.
before we started recording last week, you and I had like a 20-minute conversation about this bowling league that you were in at one point, in which you were like the baby of the group. It was you and a whole bunch of like geriatric men.
Right. I was maybe 25 and they were all 70.
Okay. So you were 25, they were all 70. But the interesting about this, and the interesting part of this story that you were saying last week, which I was just dying laughing at because I love this type of thing, is that these guys were obsessed with the ice cream that they were going to eat every week after the bowling league game was over, or series of games, whatever. Bowling night was over.
Yep.
They were going
Wednesday.
Okay.
It was a Wednesday, so there's no, significant sport on Wednesday night. It's not like it was Monday where everybody's going home to watch Monday Night Football. No. So the event was bowling league Wednesday night, then go home and eat ice cream.
Okay. So what's so funny to me about this story are the details of it. One of the details being that each of these 70-year-old men had extremely specific routines for where they were going to go to purchase their ice cream, what flavor of ice cream they were going to get, how much, the quantity of the ice cream they would eat, whether or not their spouse was involved in the ice cream ritual and what they would eat. And then on top of all of this, they would have this exact same conversation, virtually word for word, every single week, like Groundhog Day, with the same level of interest, intensity, enthusiasm, and novelty.
Yes. And I thought, I forgot to tell you this. The other day I was driving and this popped into my head. Probably the craziest deviation that they ever did get to was one guy, one guy talking about how he arranged the scoops of ice cream in this very broad, flat bowl, the sort of bowl that you would put pasta in, so like it's mostly a plate, but it's technically a bowl. You know what I'm talking about,
I have a
right?
bowl like that. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like a super flat bowl. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's dinner plate sized. And so, by the way, these guys, when they talk about a bowl of ice cream, they talk about something of that size. So they're going home and eating like half a gallon of ice cream and calling it a bowl. But the guy talked about how he might start putting another scoop on the top. And then they talked about it and decided that he shouldn't do that because then the toppings wouldn't distribute evenly. That it would create like too much. I forget how they worded it, but like this one vertical mound in the center would make it so like all the toppings would like roll down there.
Yeah.
And then at the end, he's like, it's like, oh yeah, you're right. So he toyed with the possibility of adding one scoop. They as a group decided that it was a bad idea. And then he never talked about it again.
Yeah. Yes. Because the toppings would no longer have like a nice, consistent mouthful of topping with each bite as you were eating your grotesque amount of ice cream. Yep. This is not a story you can get from watching Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This is not a story that you can get from, lifting old Star Trek The Next Generation episodes. This is a bizarre story that only you have. You have this because as a weird 25-year-old, you went out and joined this bowling league with a bunch of 70-year-old guys and were witness and did it repeatedly. So it's not like you went once and like, oh, there was this funny conversation one time. You probably wouldn't have even remembered it if you just went once. They talked about ice cream afterwards for a brief period. You went home. This is a thing that falls out of your memory. No, it is.
This was 16 weeks.
It is ingrained. It is emblazoned in your memory and in your brain and has become one of your personal stories because you went back over and over and over again over the course of these 16 weeks. And it just kept happening. And they kept doing this ice cream thing. And it's a great story.
One little element to this is that the thing that I loved about it is that my dad was the same age as them, roughly. And my dad ate a bowl of ice cream like that every night of his life when he was old. This same giant bowl that, like Kevin said it perfectly, like the sort of thing Kevin McAllister would eat in Home Alone when he realizes he can eat whatever he wants. And it never occurred to me that this wasn't just a thing my dad did. And then I get to this bowling league and I see these other men going through the routine. And I'm like, this is at least a regional old man thing. Like, this is a law of nature. I had no idea it existed. That was fascinating to me that it wasn't just in my house.
Which also lends itself to being something that you would put in a story in which other people could find relatability to it, which is always like the best thing that you can do with storytelling is someone out there who doesn't know you, you don't know them, you'll never meet. You tell the story about these old men and their ice cream routine. Mentioned that you grew up with your father having this ice cream routine and never considered this to be like a rite of passage for becoming an old man in which you suddenly have to consume a gallon of ice cream before bed every night. Well, now you have something, and you only received that by doing something pretty strange that absolutely no one listening to this podcast is going to do.
No. And that's the big question is, what sorts of stuff can you do? But it's really important that you mentioned the creative side to this, because this is an implication we know is happening. It's one of the few things when we say, where is this headed and why is it a problem? We don't know. Okay. We know when it comes to entertainment, because we've seen for some time now a serious lack of interesting characters and interesting stories. And I think that's because the people writing them sincerely do not know the number of people, the breadth of people. They don't encounter these stories such that they can put them into their characters. They build all of these characters and what they do out of their own minds, as opposed to taking them from the world. And that does not work very well. Okay. It just doesn't. It's stiff. It's weird. We can name all sorts of big budget shows that do exactly this. And because of it, none of the characters resonate with you. They don't even seem all that human. And they certainly aren't the type of character who, you think, I can't wait to see what this guy does next season. With Breaking Bad, I can't wait to find out what Walter White does next. He's ratcheting up the problems he's in. I want to see this happen. Even, when Walking Dead was in its prime, this was the motivation. You had all these different types of people with different personalities who were progressing in different ways and getting themselves into various pickles individually and as a group. You wanted to find out what was going to happen because they were presented as people. Not saying every character in the show was excellent. There were some stinkers, but generally they were people. There are very few people in these shows and movies that don't feel synthetic and not real. That's point one that I want to make about this. Point two is that when you don't expose yourself to these people and let them show you who they are, you simply miss out. You miss out. You can't write those characters into something. There's a book that I read recently, a novel by a novelist who, I knew. I didn't have any conversations with them in life, but I certainly knew who they were. And they probably knew who I was. And I was extremely familiar with the subject of this book, as familiar as it gets, to the point where when I did read certain characters, and I knew the individuals they were based on. I could tell. But what really got to me about this book is all the missed opportunities. There was such a narrow range of characters, and I know it's because the author sincerely did not know that all these others existed. The people on the other side of the tracks, basically. And the story would have been much, much better, more entertaining, more engaging, and more real in so many places if those characters had been tapped. Instead, it was this weirdly narrow, Lifetime movie-ish thing. And it was a missed opportunity. That was tragic to me because there's some really good characters that could have been tapped. I mean, really good. Like the people you never forget ever because they're so bizarre. I thought, well, this isn't an oversight. It's not like they probably made a conscious decision to take from column A and leave column B alone. It was that they didn't realize column B existed. They couldn't take from it. They couldn't draw from it because they don't know. I deal with this a lot. I deal with this a lot where people don't understand what rural life is like. They just don't know. They don't know some of the sacrifices you have to make. They don't know why you make certain decisions that you do. And it's not like they don't care. It's not like they look down on it. It's not that at all. They sincerely don't know. And they haven't talked to somebody like me. So that they're not going to find out. Creates this problem where they don't know a thing and they don't even know that they don't know. Well, whether it's a creative thing or you're crafting policies for people, this is going to go very, very badly. I imagine it's going to go badly if you are trying to match up romantically in the world when you just don't understand how a whole lot of people operate. This is very destructive in a place that has a tremendous amount of diversity, which everywhere in the US and in Europe generally does. It's less of an issue if there's a totally culturally homogenous area, because then kind of by default, everybody understands everybody else. But in most places, you're in trouble. You are in trouble socially, can be professionally. You have to do things to get out of it. You have to go places and talk to people. If you maintain the silo, and Kevin, you and I are a good example of this. We were in separate silos for 25 years, where there was no crossover. If we'd stuck with that, we never talk and realize that we do have something in common, which was the creative work we were doing.
Yeah.
On paper, it's ridiculous that we even get along.
Yes. Yeah, as we argue over whether 80s goth and hardcore are the same same genre of music or not.
It's roughly the same music. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. I guess what kills me about so many of these stories, and I wanted to talk about this more because I've been thinking about it lately, is how flat and cartoonish everyone is. And you can tell as you're watching it that it is what you're talking about, in which it's like the authors making up their version of what this person is like without drawing any inspiration from real people that they've met in real life. Because if that were the case, they would realize that real people are so much more complex, so much weirder. They are passionate about weird things. They are hypocrites. They have so many dimensions. They are, maybe it's, like someone who is a 45-year-old alcoholic dishwasher because he can't hold a job, but has an IQ of, 160. Like that's a person.
That's a person.
Right? That's a real person. It's not like, here's my cartoon character, like made up version of what I think like a 45-year-old diner dishwasher is like, because that's going to be boring. It's not going to be shit. It's going to be garbage. It's going to be a crappy character. It will, unless it's a farcical comedy and, it's supposed to be one dimensional. If you're trying to do a real
you need a
character,
caricature, then maybe it works. But if you want it at all to be real, no.
It will be flat and it will be boring. I thought this is I'm the only person who didn't like this movie that I know of. But I felt this way about The Holdovers, which is a movie, a new film that is nominated for Best Picture. It stars Paul Giamatti. I don't know if anybody in the episode chat has even seen this, or anybody listening has seen this.
And I hadn't heard of it before you mentioned it.
Yeah, but it got glowing reviews, and I couldn't even get through it because I felt like these characters were exactly what I'm talking about. It was like the author or the screenplay writer is saying, like, here's what I think a professor obsessed with Roman history is like. Here's what I think like a rich kid, a lazy rich kid who doesn't deserve anything in life and is completely spoiled and pampered is going to act like at a private school. None of it seemed real. It all seemed like a cartoon characters. It was hard for me to watch. So I was just bored by the lack of depth. It all seemed so two-dimensional.
I'm stumbling here because I've never had to verbalize what I'm thinking right now, and I don't know how. But there is no perfect substitute for simply coming across people and getting to know them and meeting them. We talked about this in that long discussion last week, where reading fiction is actually the second best way. You simply are thinking about other people's lives. That is not nearly as good as knowing them, but you're thinking in a different arena and different set of circumstances, and seeing characters process the troubles that they're in or the circumstances that they're in. Movies as well. Obviously, this is,
and if it's well written, it'll be messy and it'll be real. Yeah.
So that's great, but it's not as good as just plain getting to know people. And I realized a few years ago that that's the best understanding of the world that I have, is the people that I've met. And many times that is knowing why they think very differently than they do. So I keep a running notes thing on my phone of things that I think of here, and it's quite often people I remember and then the offshoots of them. And that was one of the first things I put on here. And I think I've read it before, but meeting something who's happy precisely because their dreams are over. This is a really weird thing, because you get people who are bummed that their dreams fizzled and never happened. Yeah, that's obvious. But there are people who are actually unburdened and freed by their dreams having passed them by. That's really unique. And you have to meet somebody like that to recognize it again, or even understand that it can exist. You see this with the different ways that people react to somebody dying, where there are people who have tremendous grief. If there's a caregiver, for example, this is where it can get really interesting. A caregiver can be so committed to caring for somebody that when they're gone, well, what do? It's almost like an empty nest syndrome. There are people who are relieved, even though they love the person to death. Well, I should have put that a different way. They love they love the person unconditionally forever. When like a high degree of care is gone, there may be a sense of relief there that they don't have to do that anymore. And then it can get even messier, where that person can feel guilty,
right,
that they even feel a sense of relief.
Right.
I remember years ago talking to a woman who lost her husband, and then a few months later moved all the furniture around in her living room because finally she could put it where she wanted to put it. Mm-hmm. I guess the husband had insisted on a chair or a couch or something being in a spot that she didn't want. And she had conflicting feelings about this. She was really thrilled that she could finally do it her way and enjoy it how she wanted to. And then she felt, guilty about that because of where it came from. Right. Well, you have to meet these people. You can't make them up, because you're not going to get to the nuance there. So I'm scrolling down to pick randomly. I'm really swiping here. Here's one about people who avoid formal education often being interesting because they've had to construct their own frameworks for understanding the world. When they choose to go on their own, well, they have to build their own framework for understanding. And if somebody can do that successfully, they're going to be interesting. They're going to be really unique to talk to. So, I look at that and I think, well, this person isn't interesting because they didn't go to college. They're interesting because they constructed their own framework for life. These are two totally different things. But I met somebody like that who made me realize that. Another one that I just got here is about when everyone has nothing together, sometimes they feel like they have everything. And that was something that I saw a holdover with in parts of Eastern Europe, where there were people who were coming out of the Soviet era who sincerely felt the most comfortable when everybody had nothing. They all had nothing together. And they didn't quite know how to function when people started to get more to varying degrees. And you have some stratification that never existed before. They preferred, rather than having differences between people, they preferred everybody being at the bottom. Well, there are a lot of reasons for that, and that's a particular type of person. I mentioned Shelby Foote in the past. He wrote the long Civil War series that's like 3,000 pages. He was on Ken Burns' documentary, which is really what put him on the map. Guy from Mississippi with a southern drawl, white hair and beard, just extremely pleasant voice. You listen to him forever. And he was a Southern Gothic author before he did the Civil War stuff. And that includes what they call the grotesque, which is really horrible behavior and consequences of it. It's not a horror movie grotesque with, chainsaw massacres. No, it's like grotesque socially and culturally, people making unconscionable decisions and stuff like that. And he had a point that the tragedies that came out of the writing in that genre were mostly when somebody fails to measure up to a tradition, whether it's family or cultural. Their failure to measure up to tradition is what makes the tragedy. I started seeing that in places, and I remembered the funny things. I remembered somebody else, an author who was quite a bit more well-known than Shelby Foote, saying something very, very similar in kind of the Jewish tradition of fiction. So all of these things, here's my point. We're going so long-winded on this. I'm sorry, Kevin, that I've monologued it. Every bit of these notes comes from a person I've talked to, that I've seen, that I've met. There is no substitute for that. And at a certain point, those stories start to collide, like with those two authors, where they feed off one another. You have enough information that things add up and bounce off one another. There is no substitute for that at all. It is necessary everywhere. The circumstances don't even matter if the person can be real. Star Wars is a fantastic example of this. Nothing in Star Wars is real at all. Nothing's even close to real. At least in Star Trek, a bunch of things kind of mimicked the way we do things now, whereas in Star Wars, very little does. It didn't matter because the main character was going through the hero's journey, and he had the mentor and all these things that kind of exist in real life. Even in the craziest fiction, it's kind of real based in, thrown into, odd circumstances. And if it isn't real, it's not going to be any good. It just won't. Or it has to be so sufficiently not real as to be entertaining in its own right. It's possible to do that, but that's hard. That's about as hard as it gets. How do you have any chance at resonating with somebody, whether it's writing a YouTube video, writing a novel, you're at a party or a bar or whatever the hell, and strike up a conversation with somebody? How do you have any chance of resonating with them and putting them at ease and feeling comfortable if you don't have a broad, diverse experience with the general makeup of the world.
You don't. You just lay down and rot. That's what you do instead. I think that I distilled or synthesized sort of the interesting part of all of this, at least when it comes to, well, no, I think all of this, which is that the interesting part is the surprise. So, like, the interesting part to me of your ice cream story was the surprising fact that all of these old men were doing the same thing, and that they would tell each other about it week after week, even though you would think they already know that, yeah, like Bill is going to have chocolate ice cream and Gary is going to have coffee ice cream. Like, we already went through this last week, but that didn't matter. They just kept doing it.
Didn't matter.
And that is the interesting surprise to me. And that's where the interesting characters come from, is the surprise. So I want to just mention real quick that my parents, as well as Jeff Strife in the chat here, mentioned that the end of The Holdovers, you kind of have to see. It makes the rest of it make sense. So if anyone is listening and thinks that, yeah, no, I didn't get it because I didn't watch the whole thing, fair enough. No, I didn't. But I gave up on it because there was no surprise to me. I felt like I was watching something completely boring and obvious and predictable and cookie cutter and just from a place of, I don't know, like no surprise. Like everything that was happening looked to me like there was no reason to continue. Like I'm just sitting there thinking like, why should I watch the rest of this? There's nothing to look forward to.
In the chat now. Yeah, he's echoing that, saying that he knew how it was going to unfold. Yeah, that's a killer, isn't it? When you know, if you turned it off right now, you know what you would miss.
That's what boring is if there's no surprise, then there's nothing interesting. And so I think by default, when it comes to things like writing a character, there's no way for you to surprise yourself in crafting that. How could you surprise yourself? You are you. You already know the things that you think. Like
tickling yourself being impossible.
Yeah, you can't tickle yourself. You do have to go out and be surprised by someone else and then, fold that into your experience and couple that with other things and combine stuff and whatever. But that's where the craft is.
This is such a horrible breakthrough. But that is the issue. You can't tickle yourself, and you have to go out into the world and be tickled by many, many people.
Yes. Big, bold letters. You can't tickle yourself. That is the lesson.
It really is, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That this is something you cannot do on your own. And you have to go out.
And look at that. It took us an hour of talking to get to it. So there you go. Point proven once again.
Yeah. Yes. And I've been obsessing over this, and like, it's been difficult to talk about because there are a lot of specific examples I want to use from over the years that I can't because, I don't want to throw somebody under the bus. I don't want to ID anybody. Like, no. And I wish I could because, the context of that person makes it make more sense. And I wish I could just, machine gun out like 12 examples here where this is a problem. Something I didn't mention is that you see this too with people traveling successfully or not. If you're in a short place for a short time, you can get away with being the broadcaster a little bit because if you're in a place where, people are interested in you, which is not everywhere. Some people are sick of you before you even show up. But at a point, it has to transition where they want you to be interested in them and they want to be proud of them and their place. If you stay long enough for that to happen, that shift in mood to happen, you find out very quickly if you're any good at the stuff we've been talking about or not. And you're forced into practicing. You're forced into being better. Otherwise, you're walking around alone the whole time. Thinking of those non-compulsory, non-mandated ways to to get this. Well, you're guaranteed if you go to another country that people are going to be sufficiently different from you. Everybody will. That's obviously expensive and takes a block of time to do it. A lot of things have to line up for somebody to do that. So that's not for everybody. Kevin, do you have a suggestion for an accessible, normal person thing to do that isn't weird?
No, not really. No. I mean, I think that your suggestion of this being a good reason to read old books, read old novels is the easiest, like the lowest barrier to entry I can think of for just kind of diving into other characters, how other people react to situations, how other people think about the world. That to me seems like the easiest place to start. I think it's super hard. I think it's basically impossible to tell someone to do something like join a bowling league or you need to get a job as a dishwasher or a bartender or, something in which you're working in a place surrounded by people that you don't want to deal with, but you have to show up anyway. No one is going to say yes to that. I don't think.
I don't think so either. And we talked about this in the after discussion last time, like what's realistic that can be done that doesn't feel like you're, doing that thing. And it's like, oh, no phones allowed, some goofy rule thing. I don't think we really came up with anything that was useful, and it may not be possible. I don't know what to say to people other than you have to talk to everybody all the time. And you don't have to do that forever. You really don't. Like, I am very proud of being an example of somebody who did their time talking to people in the world and now hides from the mailman because I'm embarrassed at how much weight of packages he brings me each day. That's the extent of my human interaction. I did my part and I understand things well enough. And, now I can pull it back and be quite happy. But I think you have to go and do things and talk to people as you do it. And they have to be people who are not like you. I could do an entire episode on this. And Kevin, if you have another kidney stone thing, I'm probably going to just solo an episode where I talk about this one thing. You need to look at the hands of the people you're with in person. And this sounds goofy, but it's not. If the hands of the people in the room aren't different, those people aren't different. Hands are the one thing that nobody can cheat. Well, there's another, but that's privileged. Hands are the obvious thing that nobody can cheat. If you work with your hands and you've done it for 20 years, you're not going to look like a jewelry model. Your hands show what a person has been doing and what they do now. You can also look at people's hands without it being weird. Nobody's going to think that you're looking at their hands. You can just glance down. But if you're in a room where everybody's hands are soft and supple and have no scars and haven't been used much, and there's no grime under anybody's fingernails, et cetera, then you know that you're in a room with people who type, click a mouse, or point fingers for a living. Ultimately, that's not a very diverse crowd. So when you think about where you can go, Boss Red's hands are at crotch level when they're hanging. If you're seated at a table, then you're safe. But this would be a decent rule to do something with somebody. Say, well, I want to go to a place where people's hands aren't the same as mine. If you're of age and you go to places like bars on the weekend, think about, well, what bar could we go to where it's going to have, people with rough hands if you were the supple type, supple if you're the rougher type, makes no difference. But if you deal with people who have different hands than you are guaranteed, absolutely guaranteed, to be talking to people who are just plain different than you.
To get tickled.
They will tickle you differently because their hands are different than the tickling you're used to.
Yes. Perfect. All right. We're going to end on that. You cannot tickle yourself. Thank you to all of our patrons for hanging out. Lovely seeing your faces as always. If you want to become a patron, go to patreon.com/thecreateunknown. We will be back next week with our hands, and we hope to, maybe you should send us some pictures of your hands so that we can judge you accordingly. If not, then just hang out on our Discord and we will talk to you then. We will see you, Space Cowboys.
Thanks for listening to The Create Unknown. We make this show with the support of our patrons. 100% of that goes directly to keeping episodes going every week, and the recent support has been amazing. Sidpoke, NRM, Venture Addicts, Weezer Good, you all really do make this show happen. Thank you to the Tots and Dumpster crew, old and new, who save tiny little lives every month. Thank you to our grizzled, battle-hardened child infantry. Clemente de los Santos, Dan the Latch, Demetrius Andrews, Erica, Farrakhan, Jen Mefisanti, Kevin Menard, Mikhail Steinke, Monahim, Natsu, Penny Peddler, Risebread, Ryan Kinder, Samuel Manser, Sean S., Sean Malone, and Tom Vidioger. And a tremendous shout out to our elite baby gang commanders: Atrocious Guff, Kat, Dojangles, Graham Robertson, James Gallagher, Jeff Davis, Orange Vanilla Coke, Patrick Pister, TCU's personal pilot, Andy, Ryan Carroll, Baseweight, Vinthos, Yeetus Deletus, Jonas Walter, Nathan Robinson, Jelksies, and of course, Trevstead. You are the elite. Thank you as well to our indentured servants, producer-editor Ben Webster, Minecraft mogul Laterman, Discord kitten wrangler Conrad, and producer emeritus Dan Yoshua. Thanks to Baseweight for use of Created in the Unknown for the opening theme. Thanks to Electro Voice for giving us mics to sound good on top of it. And a special thanks to Main Gear for powering all of our PC endeavors. The Create Unknown is an Unknown Media production in partnership with Studio 71.